Welcome back to the Journal Club of Justice, an online journal club made up of a small group of friends who meet once a month to praise, scrutinize, and discuss research of the physical therapy nature, one article at a time. Could be new, could be old, but we feel it will create a good discussion that will influence our practice. We hope that you will get as much out of this as we do. We do ask you keep in mind new research is always coming out and progressing, so do not take any of what we say as medical advice, facts, or clinical suggestion. Welcome to episode 3 of the Journal Club of Justice. My name is Dr. Adam Schwert of Run Mental. Accompanying me for this episode is Dr. Delian Callier of the New Medical Nomads podcast. You can check that out on LibSync as well as iTunes. I said that right? LibSync? Libsyn and iTunes. And soon to be graduate, a couple weeks or so.
December 1st is the official
December
graduation
1st. Student physical therapist, I guess December 1st will be Dr. Physical Therapist Brad Moore. Today we're talking all about injury prevention in regards to ACL tears, specifically after an initial ACLR. There are estimated 250,000 ACL injuries every year in the U.S., each with their own 3 to 9 months of rehab to get back to their prior levels of function or performance, depending on how lucky you are. We know from previous research that the number one predictor of injury is previous injury, but each month following the ACLR re-injury rate decreases 51% up to 9 months. So not only is time important, but so is our movement, which is what these articles today are for this episode, what they're looking at. So Brad Moore here was the one who selected these for this month. Do you want to talk about kind of where you found these, kind of backstory, why you're interested in this, etc.?
Yeah, it's not a huge story. I had a clinical rotation down at Children's Hospital at the CSCC in West County, just an outpatient children's location, and they had me do an in-service. And I had, in one of the clinics I had worked in, gathered a research article, and this was one of the sources they used. And this guy Paterno is he's one of the PTs out in a Cincinnati group at a children's location there, and I really liked what they were putting out, and I felt like it was a pretty good article to use for my my clinical rotation project that I had to do there. So that's where I came across it and just kind of used that to complete one of my assignments for school and held on to it since. It was done in like 2016, so it's still kind of recent.
Still pretty recent. I recognize a lot of these names. I think they have a pretty solid group out in Cincinnati. Paterno, Schmidt, I'm trying to think of some of them. Hewett.
Yeah.
Is Greg Meyer, is he running good?
Greg Meyer. Don't recognize his name.
Okay.
So this article is entitled Biomechanical Measures During Landing and Postural Stability Predict Second Anterior Cruciate Ligament Injury After Anterior Cruciate Ligament Reconstruction and Return to Sport. Lead author is Mark V. Paterno, and this was published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine in October of 2010. If you watch the replay on YouTube, which will be posted later this week, most likely, there will be that full name and lead author, all that information. Go find it. We'll be there for you. All right, so let's dive in. What did we learn about ACLs and preventing the second? Anybody want to jump in right away? Or?
I was just kind of looking at their abstract here.
Always on the abstract. Always on the abstract.
About as far as I could. So they got 56 athletes that went under ACL reconstruction, and then they basically did a bunch of tests on them using this 3-dimensional motion analysis machine. After they collected all their data, they basically just waited until they had injuries, and then 13 of them actually had a re-tear or tear of the ACL and contralateral limb. And then through that, the results found that the hip kinematics that they looked at, the knee kinematics that they looked at, and there's basically like a series of 4 that could predict whether or not they were going to have a second ACL injury. The conclusion was pretty strong, and so I was excited to read this because it said hip and knee during dynamic landing tasks and postural stability deficits after ACLR are predictors of a second anterior cruciate ligament injury. And so they use that R, not a could be, not a probability or anything like that. It's like R. So they need to have some strong support for this article in order to be that strong in their conclusion.
Yeah, I was interested, because this is very specific to a second one, and to seeing if there was going to be any difference. I mean, it's pretty clear for the initial injury. I was interested just to see if there was going to be anything different or unique about, preventing the second one. Anything to add there, Brad?
I had one patient that she was rehabbing for her third ACL, ACLR.
Same side or
same side. So
oh my gosh,
that kind of was, she was the kind of the driving point for me choosing ACL for this, because I was like, what on earth is going on if you?
And this was a children's.
Yes.
So this is young.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah. With
this study, they had ages 10 to 25. So this was very, very specific to
yeah.
what I was dealing with there. It's wild. And those 4 tests that they had run through, the 4 things they found, they had a sensitivity of 0.92 and a specificity of 0.88 together, using all 4 of those tests to identify, hey, this is what you need to look at to prevent a second ACL tear.
Yeah. And that's huge.
Yeah.
Being, just for anybody who's not super clear on specificity and sensitivity, if you had, 100% of those, having 100% of both those would be, perfect in your ability to kind of rule out or rule on any kind of specific diagnosis or risk factor. Just very briefly hitting on that. So obviously ACL is a huge industry. That's what I was looking for. Kind of not an industry, but a component of rehab and healthcare. With a lot of injuries every year, it takes up a lot of money and a lot of time, away from your sport or activities, whatever you're wanting to do. Not only that, but after following ACL, you're at a very highly increased risk for osteoarthritis of that joint, or any other types of aches and pains. You're just more prone in that joint to get that. So,
yeah, I think it quoted you were 7 times more likely to have another ACL tear after the first one. So if you were to go out and take people off the street and put them in a group, the risk for ACL tear is pretty low. But as soon as somebody has an ACL tear, that puts you
6% for the initial injury.
Once you have that ACL tear, that puts you in a whole different group. And then now it's
looks like upwards of 25%, depending on
like
what research article you're looking at.
Yeah. And what you hit on with the reason they want to reconstruct these and surgically fix this ACL is that it does put you at a higher risk of a premature development of a OA or osteoarthritis. What I thought was interesting is they also cited that as despite surgical or non-surgical intervention, that you're more likely to get premature OA, but they're trying to delay that so that you're not needing a knee replacement at 35, 40.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if some of that is from, those patients that you don't get full range of motion back. And now you have that little bit of that joint, that's not being nourished from getting, the motion. Motion is lotion. It's how the joint gets nourished. So I wonder if that's kind of a big thing from that. Get that full knee extension. That's for all you clinicians out there. One thing I thought was interesting is they, why,
so they found, I guess they was just still in the intro. So they found, a risk of a second ACL injury is greatest in individuals with a history of an initial ACL injury caused by contact rather than non-contact, which I thought was surprising.
It's not the typical mechanism that you think of.
Yeah.
Typically it's like a quarterback that's dropping back to drop a pass and he turns on it, or an athlete that's making a cut, and then it's the medial rotation of that femur on top of that stable tibia that causes it to go. So that surprised me too.
Could it be that that's going to be a worse injury if you do have contact with it? Or are we thinking more like MCL, integrity involvement, LCL, meniscus?
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother layer.
Because I imagine like if you have that typical triad that kind of goes along with that, it's gonna take more rehab to get that back to what it used to be.
True. So it could be just not executing on, the biomechanical component. But then it's still contact, not a non-contact. So I think of, if you execute the biomechanics, we can never 100%, say you're never going to get injured. You're moving perfectly, but you greatly reduce the risk of a non-contact ACL. I don't know. Thought I'd bring it up. Found it interesting. But overall, I thought, a lot of it, is a lot of the same stuff, from an initial. I think a big challenge is getting to see these patients long enough, getting them to a point where they can execute that biomechanical component, able to control that knee valgus. And sometimes, whether it's insurance, financial reasons, transportation, if you're in a less than ideal area, or whatever the thing that's limiting them from getting more therapy is, can really inhibit them getting back to full function, full participation, and whatever it is they're wanting to get back to.
Yeah, for sure. Because I've typically seen patients for up to 6 months. But this one said that injury is kind of greater up to that first 7 months. And then you quoted up to 9 months.
Yeah, that's from Grindem et al. In 2017. It's actually an article we reviewed earlier this summer before we started recording these. So yeah, up to 9 months, every month you wait is a 51% decrease in a re-injury risk, which that's huge.
Right. And historically, it used to be just by time limit. So, you hit 6 months after surgery, you're good, return to sport. And they found that's not optimal. And so now they're looking at a whole bunch of different things, which I'm sure we'll hit in with, like quad strength, single limb strength, your motor movement while you're performing certain dynamic tasks. And they're really trying to find the key components that are going to allow you to say, yes, you're ready to return to sport.
Yeah.
Because it's not just timeline.
Mm-hmm. Very much. I mean, I feel like, we did the timeline thing for so long just because it's kind of what we've always done. Mm. But I feel like in the back of our heads, we always knew that it may not always depend on that. Because you look at elite athletes, they're getting back, and I don't even know. I don't work with any professional athletes, but I know, they get injured and it's like, it looks just nasty, when you watch the replays, and they're back in a few months. Are they able to, just because they're starting at a higher baseline, are they able to get back quicker, or are they just going back because it's professional athletes and they're trying to make, it's a money thing at that level, and people are going to watch them play.
That's like the best of the best scenario too, because you have this, 0.1% genetic specimen of awesomeness, and then they're getting therapy once a day for those 4 to 5 months. Yeah, and they're getting the best surgeons, and they're getting the best, care. And
they'll get PT, chiropractic, nutrition, best doctors, best athletic trainers. It's fully encompassed, a very holistic kind of level
Well, if you think about those athletes too, that's their livelihood. That is how they are going to provide for their families. So there's that internal component of pushing themselves, whereas if you've got a 13, 14-year-old athlete, it may not be the same for them. So
That's true.
Yeah.
Another thing I really liked about this article is they kind of had a good spread on how the ACLR was originally done. They had 25 that had the patellar bone tendon autografts, and then 27 had it using the hamstring tendon graft, but only 4 of them went under the cadaver tissue graft. But I mean, it's a pretty even
Yeah, that was
split.
good, because especially we jump to the results for a second here, that it looked like it didn't matter how you repaired it, and even if there was laxity, no laxity in the joint afterwards, looks like that didn't seem to matter as far as your risk for a second tear. So
yeah,
it's good stuff.
Any comments on the tests that they used or the movements that they were analyzing?
So, well, we can go ahead and go through that first. We want to talk about it. They did the drop vertical jump maneuver. So basically you had the patient stand on a 31 centimeter box, and then they drop down from the 31 centimeter box, land on the ground, and immediately explode up towards the ceiling. And they do 3 trials on that. All of this was done while they were using that 3D motion analysis machine to evaluate different angles at the hip and the knee, the ankle, just to see how everything was going. Everything all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just looking to see if there are any comments, questions, or anything.
Okay. But I really liked kind of what they found there, but we'll get to the results there. But they did the drop vertical maneuver looking at all of the joint angles. They also had 2 pressure plates at the bottom for whenever they landed, so they could define the initial contact as 10 newtons of energy hitting the ground. That was their initial contact spot. And then they kind of reviewed how everything went, the progression from that point all the way up into the explosion into the air. That was the very first test. And they did a postural stability analysis where you stand on this machine and it kind of takes you through your base of support and forces you to stand up straight with your arms crossed and basically balance in place while it kind of like throws you around. And then they looked at anterior and posterior knee laxity.
So is that on the postural stability analysis?
Yeah.
Is that on an unstable surface?
So it's like a the ones that I've seen, it's always been the Biodex.
Is that?
They
You
got
have that in the
yeah,
research?
They do have area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like that big gray foam thing?
Yeah, I think that's an example of one. There are other ones where you stand on, it's like a circular platform you stand on, and you can decrease the resistance, they'll give you less of a base of support so that you have to really, really struggle.
So it's kind of moving and then you're reacting to it. Okay.
And then they did the anterior posterior knee laxity, which I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but it seems like they kind of just didn't really mention much about it in the results portion. So I guess
I didn't see it again.
I don't think they really found anything with it.
No, I think I just remember one sentence saying that it was not significant. I didn't really find anything that was relevant with it.
Yeah, but those are the main tests that they ran. And it seemed like the drop vertical jump maneuver and the postural stability analysis were the big keys for them.
Yeah, definitely. So if I can comment on those 2, that I love the drop vertical jump because you can see the biomechanics going, especially when you get on video. My issue with those or any jump tests really is that the majority of ACL tears are happening, under fatigue at the end of a game, match, etc. And they don't always, doing this, whether they do it 3 times or something.
Right.
I mean, that's not going to get that fatigue component. I mean, someone can move really well 3 times, but you do it 5, 10, 20 times over the course of a game, and those mechanics are going to change as you fatigue.
That's an excellent point.
And then on the postural, I also want to touch on they look at this, or did I just make it out? Hold on. What? I don't know. One thing, is important is the acceleration, or their ability to decelerate their body as they're landing. So we have a technology in our clinic called the Dorsify, and it can kind of estimate, that initial peak acceleration, seeing the rate of how fast you decelerate your body. And so if you're not able to control yourself very well, you're going to come down really hard, really fast. Whereas if you're pretty strong, stable, you can kind of control yourself and come slow and react in a very organized manner. So I don't remember if they looked at that directly, but if you have the technology to look at that, that's, or if you can even watch it in real time, and as you watch, 50, 100, as these people start coming through your clinic and you see more and more, you'll kind of get an idea of, what is kind of fast, what is kind of slow. Same thing we look at, and we watch someone's running gait, and there's no real great understanding of what is overpronation. We just know that we need to have it for shock absorption. So it's more important about the rate of that pronation. Same kind of thing. We don't know exactly what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. But as you look at more and more of it, you kind of get an understanding of what is fast, what is appropriate. Does anybody want to expand or touch?
Yeah.
Anything?
I don't know if they mentioned it in this article or the next one that we're going to cover, but clinically it was, and I don't remember how they worded it because they worded it really well, but it was the amount of impact that you have when you land. Can you hear it? And the softer it is, the slower, more controlled that deceleration of the knee is going to be. And the louder it is, the more impact it is, and the more force is going to go through that knee, causing an anterior shear. So that's a quick and easy way if you don't have the Dorsify.
Or any technology. That's a great reflection of it. I mean, you do. People who are big and running do the same thing. You put them on the treadmill, it's like boom, boom, boom. And it's like, whoa. Quiet the speed down a little bit. Yeah, especially all the shin splints. Yeah, no wonder. And then, postural stability. I'm kind of more one. So it sounds like they may have done something more on an unstable surface. And I feel like, we get a lot more value out of doing stuff on a stable surface, but then providing that external perturbation, pushing them around, catching the ball, having, rather than being on that unstable surface, something moving underneath you, because that's not really what we're doing in the real world. Real world is very stable and you're moving on top of it. So I think the more you can challenge that, and this is my personal opinion, I don't have anything to back this up. There may be something out there, maybe not. But that's just kind of my personal opinion that, an external perturbation is, a little bit better than that unstable surface.
I do like how they try to mimic that position that you usually see in ACL tear with the slight flexion at the knee, single limb, and then they do the test in that motion. So,
yeah, that was a good component. And they just follow it up every month or so?
I believe so. I had it highlighted.
Yeah, contacted monthly by email or phone for 12 months.
For statistical analysis, when I was originally looking at this in the abstract, I was very surprised to find that they only needed 13 individuals with a re-tear in order to have the appropriate power for this study. And then they went into it a little bit and they found that they actually only needed 7 kids with a re-tear of an ACL in order to hit the statistical power that they would need. But they were looking at a lot with this. They were looking at hip motion and knee motion and postural stability and looking at the interaction between all tests. And then they were taking out one by one and looking at each test. That was surprising for me that they only needed that few of
since they were looking at so much.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't run the math, and there's equations you can run and do it yourself, and I'm sure it comes out. But I was just that was something that stuck out to me. And then the fact that they only kept their P at less than 0.05, you would think it would be much smaller. Again, looking at so much, even with 13 people.
And I think they kind of acknowledged that in their study limitations of their original 56. But I think they followed it up with what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, they said they wanted a bigger sample size originally that they didn't get, but then the re-tear rates ended up being almost twice of what they wanted for the study. But yeah, there's just they were looking at a lot. That's all I have.
Okay.
About that.
Yeah. We usually skip over that. So that's good. Good. So that was interesting. They found for the uninvolved limb, if there was a lot of transverse plane movement, that internal rotation, that was significant for their increased risk of, second ACL tear. I wasn't sure if that was on that limb that they're at an increased risk, or that meant they're at an increased risk on the opposite side. Because I just assumed that it was like a second ACL on, the same side is what we were kind of overall. I just had in my head for some reason going through this, so that kind of threw me off a little bit.
Well, I think the way I kind of read it was that it's the contralateral one because you're compensating for that, and you'll land first on that uninvolved limb with more weight on that side, and with that you would internally rotate the hip. And not to jump into the results, but that was one of the things, is that the weak hip external rotators end up leading to that knee valgus and down the line all the way up to the ACL re-tear.
Yeah, and that aligns with, I think it was Zach who mentioned to me recently, and I just did a little series on this on, having that rotational control. I believe he heard it from Charlie Weingroff, who's saying that a lot of the knee valgus that we think we see is actually coming more from that transverse plane rather than a straight adduction in the frontal plane. So that kind of goes right along with that, how important it is to have that external rotation and kind of get that stable knee when you're trying to decelerate the limb there.
I think he also hit on, instead of focusing on that posterior gluteus medius, that PGM that we always focus on for Trendelenburg, it's actually just hit the glute max hard, because that's your big external rotator.
Yeah. It's just so big, so much cross-sectional area that, it's just going to be able to overpower anything that not overpower, but produce more, force and have more of a resultant into external rotation than that posterior glute medius would anyway.
So they had 4 variables overall that they had looked at in the between all the tests that they ran. The one was the hip internal rotation, and I should have found this before I started speaking up. But they had, so it was the transverse plane net moment impulse of the hip, so that hip internal rotation, the dynamic frontal plane knee range of motion, the side-to-side differences in sagittal plane knee moment at initial contact, and deficits in postural stability that predicted the second ACL injury with both high sensitivity and specificity. So that, correct me if I'm wrong if you guys read this differently, but that frontal plane knee range of motion, I think they called it knee abduction, so that's just an overall knee valgus appearance. So just kind of, if you're looking at a left leg, just that excessive knee valgus. I think that just kind of coupled in with that transverse plane net moment impulse, which we've been talking about. But they said the side-to-side differences in the sagittal plane knee moment at initial contact, they were looking at the quads versus hamstring ratio. And I felt like that's where the type of graft they were going to pull was going to play in the most. But we found that it didn't. But, when you're looking at that, you expect a 50 to 80% ratio between quads and hamstrings. And especially with the females, those that didn't have that hamstring ratio to catch up with the quads, to, I think Dylan mentioned it earlier, to adjust for that shear, that's whenever that ACL went.
Yeah, and there's so much solid research on that quad hamstring ratio, but I think it's such a bummer that it's so expensive to test for. To have that isokinetic machine, like clinically, you just can't do that for the majority of people.
I know they've tried to replicate that with what are the pressure sensors? Dynamometers. They try to replicate that, and it's fairly accurate with like quads, but the problem is quads so strong that you're almost it's not a brake test. It's more of a just push as hard as you can into me type of test. And then you can do the hamstrings that way as well, a little bit easier. But yeah, just that quad strength, and then they initially thought overall hamstring strength was going to matter, but it showed that's not as big of a key component.
Yeah, I thought that was
more of that
was really huge,
ratio.
Because we're taught in school is like hamstrings to pull that tibia back to reduce that anterior shear. But really, it sounds like that's still going to be a very important component. You always treat the whole kinetic chain, but getting that quad control so you're not falling as far into that that knee flexion and knee rotation, whatever, you're going to absorb that force a little better is a bigger component to that. And that might even segue nice into looking at side-to-side differences, which we always want to strive for as much symmetry as we can. And it looks like there was a 4.1 fold greater asymmetry in those that had the second tear. And does that equate to a 400% increase, basically? Do I understand that correctly? What is fourfold?
I think that's,
Anyway, it's a big deal.
Kind of a big deal. No, I think it is.
But I was thinking about that earlier today. We strive for that symmetry, but in prevention of the second one, we have to know that the uninvolved limb is first, in a position to where it's not at risk. If we're trying to build up the involved to the uninvolved, which is still at a significant risk based on these biomechanical factors, we're doing nothing. We need to build up both sides in that case, make sure we're hitting everything on all cylinders.
Which I feel like that's something that insurance has had an effect on, because it got to the point, back in the 80s, 90s, we used to strengthen both sides and we would bill for both of them, but now insurance isn't allowing you to bill for a non-affected limb, or at least some insurances. Really? Yeah. And so they'll kick it back and say, we're not paying for, this part on this side of the limb. But still, yeah, like you said, just hitting that other side, because they're just as likely to have another injury on the contralateral side than they are on that grafting side. Yep. Write your notes carefully.
Yeah. Oh, you know what really threw me off? Is this sentence here. To our knowledge, this represents the first report of biomechanical and neuromuscular factors predictive of a second ACL injury that are potentially modifiable by rehabilitative intervention. First, I was like, I don't believe that. But then, I read it a couple of times, and it's that second component that I think this very well probably is, the first one. Because everything, to date that I know of is really looking at that initial injury and preventing that.
Mm-hmm. Which has had its own trials to deal with and barriers.
Well, and also they were able to use that motion analysis machine. It seems like more of these smaller clinics are able to get access to it, whereas before it was just the big hospital systems and those clinics that were able to have those video analysis. But now that everyone's got all this technology that we've got, you're able to do it, right there with your phone or your iPad.
There's an app for that. Yeah. So when it comes to ACLs, there's a lot of, don't go into knee valgus, it's bad. Don't do this, don't do that. But is there ever a time where knee valgus is okay?
That's a big debate now. That's a big debate now, because it used to be like you don't want to ever go into valgus, but then you watch Usain Bolt run, he's got all the valgus. And I think throughout typical, like if you're treating, Ethel, the 75-year-old patient with a knee replacement, she shouldn't be going into valgus when she's standing up out of a chair. If you're doing normal daily stuff, you shouldn't go into valgus. But if you're a lifter and you're loading that squat and going to parallel and back, it's probably normal to have some
You
valgus.
always, like every powerlifter you watch, they go deep into the hole, and then every time they come out, like knee valgus, and they come up. Which, I've heard the argument that it's almost mechanically more efficient because it helps to get those glutes engaged, almost like a quick stretch kind of thing. So, and, maybe the same thing with, Usain Bolt. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I know, there is an argument for certain scenarios, certain patient populations, where it might be okay. Assuming it's not, we're not taking your knee to the floor, kind of, nothing crazy, but, that there is that, window of, this is allowable versus, that is just like, wow, don't go there.
I agree with that. Well, anything else on that one?
They had the neuromuscular control of plane motion. No, I'm sorry, postural stability. Can we talk about the results on that? Okay. Basically, just to summarize it, and Adam and Dylan jump in if you want to, but it was just the person's trunk proprioception over their base of support whenever they're landing. So, if they're favoring one leg and they go to one other side, they found that it had an effect on that. I know I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier, but what they found is that the female athletes with the decreased core proprioception and kinesthetic awareness were more likely to suffer knee injuries.
Yeah, and that almost goes back to, the ability to take research into the clinic. How do you do that?
Well, then you're going to do your single and double leg. Instead of doing what they suggested, double and single leg balance activities on stable and unstable surfaces. So if you guys have, in almost every single outpatient clinic has the foam, they have the Dynadiscs, they have the Bosu balls, they've got the trampolines with the small medicine balls. Combinations of stuff like that, I think really, really helps. And not just making sure you're not just doing it within the sagittal plane, but also doing it in the frontal plane as well.
How do you measure it?
You can't measure that.
We can.
Well, you guys can.
You can with certain technology, the Diversify. So we'll have some of the sensors on like the low back, and then part of our the athlete movement index is you go into a 1 minute front plank and then 1 minute side plank on each side, and you can kind of see those subtle variations in movement and such. And that's also videoed. So if you got the technology, use it. If you don't, just load it. It'll get better.
Else on that one, guys.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to hit on is that I think, sometimes you get an ACL patient that is not athletic, not really into fitness or even health. It was more of a traumatic injury. Maybe it was a car accident. Maybe they just stepped in a hole while walking down the street or whatever. Slipped on ice. And maybe we're, less keen to hit some of these biomechanical factors and make sure they're executing on that, which likely then puts them at, they're obviously at a higher risk for a second anyway. But if we're not hitting that just because we're thinking it's not as big of a component because they were never, they're not trying to get back to anything that would put them at an increased risk where they're cutting, pivoting, and jumping and such. We need to just make sure we're hitting that regardless of, what they're trying to get back to, because those deficits are there.
My only other question for this one is, what do you think is the next step for this research article? So now they've kind of found these limitations or this group of 4 items that predispose you to having a second ACL tear. I guess if you're looking at this, you can't read any more than past these 4 things will lead you to an increased risk. And then I guess the follow-up would be to try and treat it, try and get those glutes stronger for the internal rotation, try to control that deceleration of the knee, and then do a second study that way. And then we'll be able to find if, PT does truly have an effect on being able to reduce that.
Yeah, so there is so along with our dorsify unit and the AMI, the creator also came out with like a Play It Safe. And I think it's still a free app. I don't know, they might be charging somewhere down the line. But when you do the athlete movement index test and you get graded on like a level 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can go into that Play It Safe app, go to whatever level you're at, and then there's a series of exercises for that level, which then can help to improve your score on the athlete movement index, and then thus decrease your risk of a tear or any other injuries and such. I don't know if that's been validated in any research or anything, but it's very similar to a lot of the other therapies you would do. There's some side planks and squats and single leg activities and whatever else you can think of. You can really do, your imagination's the limiter in the rehab process. But at least coming out in the future, it looks like there's maybe some stuff coming down the line, hopefully. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I mean, ACL has been a hot topic for a while now within the literature, and there's a lot coming out on it. So hopefully we find those answers here pretty soon. I would imagine this was 2010 for this article?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so there might be a follow-up article already out.
Yeah, but it does take the problem with follow-ups, and we talked about this, was it last time with the subgrouping?
Yep.
Those follow-ups take sometimes years to get published, and finish the research, then maybe another year to get published, or whatever. The process is not very efficient.
Long process. They follow these guys for a year, right? 12 months.
Yeah.
Guys and gals.
And then, maybe it's the next article, but wasn't that the further out you got, the increase the risk was? Was that a thing? I feel like I read that.
Do I know?
So like at a year, you were at whatever they found your increased risk was. I can't remember now. The 6% or something. Mm-hmm. And then if you went out like 2 years, it was a little more, and then you went out 5 years, it was even greater.
You mean without seeking a reconstruction, or do you mean?
No, just in general. I thought I read that.
No, you're good.
It might have been the other one. Might have been. I don't know. Doesn't matter. We'll move on. It's okay.
Maybe
but it would make sense. If you're at risk, the longer you go, eventually it's probably going to happen. If you're not trying to minimize that risk. So Brad actually came up with. Did we mention this already that we had 2 articles?
I think we hit on it. I don't know if we announced it.
Okay. Well, we had two articles here. Second one here is current concepts for injury prevention in athletes after anterior cruciate ligament reconstruction. Lead author here is Timothy Hewett, and this was published again in the American Journal of Sports Medicine 2013. And it seems like these two guys, I don't know if they work together, because they're both involved with that previous study. And if you look at the references, there's a lot of Hewett articles, a lot of Paterno articles in both of them. So strong group, and they're on top of it.
So this was nice. It was just basically an overall review of kind of where we're at in the literature.
Yeah.
Things to look at.
The big thing that hits you first, and it hits you like a ton of bricks, is that approximately 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 young active athletes who undergo an ACLR will undergo a second knee injury. So you're looking at 20 to 25%.
Yep.
That's a huge chunk.
And that's been quoted elsewhere in the literature too, that a lot of these athletes aren't going back to their previous level of activity after that first injury. And so I think I can't remember the percentage, but I want to say it was like 70 to 80%.
Oh, I pulled up. I got it here.
You got it.
The numbers are all over the place.
So it's pretty low for athletes to even return to their sport, or lower than you would expect, and fairly low.
This is from Critis et al. In 2016. Actually, no, they pulled this from Arden et al. And they reported that after an ACLR, 81% of patients returned to any kind of sport. Only 65% returned to their pre-injury level of sports participation, and only 55% returned to competitive sports.
And I think
it's not very many.
After those reports came out, there's a pretty big backlash within the PT community saying, "Oh, well, my clinic we see better than that. You guys aren't doing a good job."
Of course, there was.
And then, but they're not being able to reproduce those percentages.
Yeah.
And so, the researchers were like, "If you have it, show it." Because as of now, this is what we got. Nobody's been able to beat those numbers yet.
Yeah. We really need that. Need that data driven, or that clinic driven data.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mike Reynolds' group does that. They track a lot of their stuff. Currently working on never mind. It's totally irrelevant. And do it like baseball and pitching and stuff.
So at the beginning of this, they're like, 1 out of 4 athletes are going to go into a second knee injury. Most likely it's going to be another ACL injury, either of that limb or the contralateral side.
I really thought it was important, this sentence here, in regards to the varying levels of what people were getting back to. The success after ACLR is highly varied and likely attributable in part to the wide spectrum of criteria upon which success is defined. And maybe that goes into what individual clinics are thinking. Like, my high school athlete went back to or my high school football player went back to playing football, and so that's 100% success. Mm-hmm. Like, and I'm doing that all the time. I got 3 or 4, every fall or every spring, whatever it is. And so maybe their vision of what's going on is a little skewed. Yeah. And there's also, I want to also hit on, I think I wrote it down in the article. Chris Johnson talks about this every now and again, of the different levels of return to sport. And if you're into running now, you got to follow Chris Johnson. Okay, yeah. So there's return to participation, return to sport, and then return to performance or competition. So, it's one thing to return to activities that, start to mimic that sport or that function that you want to get back to, and then it takes it to another level to actually start, maybe practicing with your team or practicing at game speed. And then another level where you're playing, let's say it's basketball or something, you got 2 20-minute halves at the collegiate level, that's 40 minutes of continuous play that you're doing. That takes you to an even higher level, which you gotta go above and beyond the typical, rehab protocol to get somebody ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Especially if there's contact versus a track athlete.
Yeah. Which ACL injuries do happen in. If you watch the Olympics, I don't remember who it was, but I think it was a U.S. athlete.
Abby D'Agostino.
One more time.
Abby D'Agostino.
Abby D'Agostino. Got kind of pinned down on the inside railing, came down. It was ugly. It was not good.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
ACL, MCL.
ACL, MCL.
LCL.
It was everything, basically.
So
She finished the race.
Was this a steeplechase runner?
No.
Okay, because that would have
This
been
is
my first
5K.
thought.
Okay.
Wow.
5K. Yeah.
Typically you think those runners, they just run straight and then turn left occasionally. You don't think of that as like a really big one. Wow, I had no idea.
So it can happen.
The thing that they found that kind of coincided with the last article is that they found that neuromuscular control during dynamic movements were the principal culprit in both primary and secondary ACL injuries. So that's kind of what they've gathered from, I think it was 5 different sources on that statement.
I didn't go into those other sources, but when I read things like that, it's almost like those, you have to make sure that what you're talking about is measurable. And I'm sure they go into exactly how they measure neuromuscular control in those other articles. But just keeping an eye out for those when you're reading articles. It almost reminds me of like that it works stuff when it like you put it on and it reduces toxins and decreases inflammation and increases your overall spiritual well-being, or like stuff you can't measure.
Right.
And
no wrap is going to work better than your liver and your kidney to remove toxins.
So yeah, if you can't measure it, then it's probably not a quality study. But again, I didn't go into these other
And I think the key word there is that it was hypothesized. So, you take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. If there are a number of people finding that, they're, coming from different areas, different circles of practice and everything, then it has a little bit more legitimacy, more likely than if it's like the same researcher finding the same thing all the time and nobody else can. Then, that's a red flag, and you gotta be like, I don't know about that.
Then it kind of breaks it down further after that with excessive out-of-plane knee loads, increased external knee abduction moments, frontal plane displacement of the trunk. The other one was reduced core proprioception. I was curious as to how they measured that.
Dorsify. I guess. I mean, that's the only one I know of because we have it, but I don't know if there are any others. I guess you could, if you had the Biodex or whatever they used in that last study for the postural stability, maybe that would kind of give you a window into what their core proprioception is. But otherwise, I'm not really sure how you would measure that.
And then again, it goes into the symmetries between both sides of the limbs. So they usually demonstrated significant side-to-side differences between the lower extremity biomechanics when they're looking at vertical drop jump tests in that knee flexion moment that we were talking about before.
I think it's pretty wild that truncated motions and reduced joint movements of the involved knee have been identified during level walking up to 2 years after their repair. That is too long for that.
Did they say that was for surgical or non-surgical?
Well, it was a repair, so I assume it's surgical.
Okay, yeah. All right. Basically,
If
just
you're
saying that.
if you're
just
repairing ACLs non-surgically,
no,
let me know how you're doing it.
You can leave it without.
Yeah, but you can't
If
repair
they're
it.
older.
I'm saying if you're repairing them,
Oh.
with your magic hands,
Give me a wrap.
probably the same hands you're breaking up fascia with.
Yeah, give me a wrap. I'll show you.
And then a little further on, the drop vertical jump landing task, exposing symmetries as well as, exposing significant asymmetries at the hip and knee, as well as, force generation and attenuation in athletes up to 4 years after. That's
scary.
That is scary. That's, at probably a year, you're starting to think you're in the clear. You're going to be pretty good. You're going back to everything, but there's potential you're not there.
You're still kind of weak. Kind of that return to performance that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Can take some time, especially if you think of the athletes who have been, because you're not going to see an athlete for up to 4 years. That's probably within that first year, you're going to discharge them at some point. And then other than in traditional PT, there are some models that kind of evolve on the spectrum and continue to see those patients. But if they just kind of drop out and maybe they stop doing their exercises, maybe they're not hitting the weight regimen during the off season in summers and stuff when they return to that sport. Yeah, I can see definitely how it would kind of linger on or even come back.
You have something you wanted to say?
Well, I mean, 4 years, and you think about an athlete, no wonder that they're compensating and favoring that involved leg, because I mean, that would scare the crap out of me if I'm an athlete and you're having that big of a difference for that long. It would be tough to go back. You know?
That's a good point. With a lot of the, they're talking about the return to sport protocols post ACL injury. A lot of them are looking at like athlete psyche and how well do they feel on that limb, and you can almost derive a little bit of weakness or something's going on. And the more nervous they are to use that side, the more at increased risk they are for an injury.
Yeah, and you start guarding a little bit and almost setting yourself up to.
Whether that's internally controlled or maybe they physically know something is
just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so adding on to your, having that spectrum, I think really the ideal situation is that, you get with a good surgeon, you get with a good therapist, and then either that therapist and clinic have some sort of, almost like, at post therapy kind of sessions that you can do. Or you then on the tail end, maybe that therapist works with them, or maybe you just know them, a really good personal trainer that can kind of continue bridging that rehab component to that performance component to make sure you are 100% good to go and ready.
Personal trainer, ATC, coach, somebody to kind of continue it after that. And
someone who
that team focused, that team based.
Someone who's worked with these athletes before, kind of knows what's going on, what deficits to look for, etc.
I think there is a site called MedBridge, which is a home exercise program website, and I think the therapists, if they're willing, can kind of bridge a little bit of that gap with updating their home exercise program, so they're not just doing the last ones that they were given for the next year and a half or however long they're going to be doing it. But the patient would have an app on their phone, and then you have your website. They have an access code. They use their access code to enter into their HEP, and if at any point they need it updated, they can just send that code to the therapist, and the therapist can look at it and make changes to it on their end, on their computer, and then it'll instantly update it on their end.
Oh, that's nice.
And I think that would be huge for a lot of these young athletes that are, unfortunately insurance runs up and they're not allowed to come see you anymore because they can't afford it.
You got some patients, it's like 20 visits for the whole year. You're like, we're going to need more than 20 visits. Like, I don't know. That's a tough situation. Do you just cram it all in and try to crash course them, or do you try to, stretch it out and only see them once a week, once every other week, so you can get that longer timeline? It's a tough scenario.
The next highlight I have talks about that quadricep strength symmetry. If you guys want to talk about that, or if you have anything before that.
One more time.
The next highlight I have is on the quad strength and keeping it symmetrical to the other limb. Again, you need that isokinetic machine to kind of test that. And they want you at 90% optimally before you return to sport. Yeah. But I've seen 80% in the literature as well. Of the
live video ended. Your live video ended.
Oops. I guess we went too long.
What's your live video? I mean, that shouldn't. Mine's still going. As far as I know. Hit done on mine.
Done.
Yeah. Pause, dude. Oh, poor connection. That's no good. Well, that's okay. Oh, you can save it now. Did you see that?
Oh no, I didn't. You can probably go back and see it.
I'm going to start another one here. Live now. All right, we're back. Don't know how long that was out. Oh well.
So yeah, quad strength symmetry. You need a kinematic machine to test it. You can try with the dynamometer. Otherwise, something that we had talked about in some of the other articles is that you can't go off of like a leg press on one limb versus the other, because there's so many other different muscles that can compensate for that, and it's not going to show you the true quad strength.
Yeah.
And I also know surgeons they really don't like that testing position for the quadriceps either, because you're using that long lever arm to kind of push on it, and they're worried that you're going to tear the ACL. I would say a lot of surgeons are getting out of that mindset and they want you to strengthen it. But I think there's still some thoughts out there that are more conservative and don't want you to do that.
Which, I mean, understandably.
Mm.
But, yeah. And that just, there's just so many, with the return to sport testing, using the isokinetics, and the, insurance limitations, it's hard to get these patients sometimes where you want them before you give them the okay. Sometimes you're just kind of forced. You're like, here's what you need. Here's where we're at. Here's where we need to be. Here's, do the best you can on your own. Contact me if you have questions, concerns, whatever. But I feel like once they're out of your clinic, things just get lost in translation. They don't stay in contact with you very well. Some people do. Some people are really good about it. Others just kind of like, well, I guess I'm done with therapy. I'm done with therapy. I'm done with everything. I'll go back to return to my sport. It's like you said nothing to them. And so that, then we have 250,000 ACL injuries every year.
Mm-hmm.
Nice job, insurance.
I saw this in the other article. It was the Multi-Center Orthopedic Outcomes Network, or the MOON group, that said that less than 50% of athletes after an ACLR return to sport. And that's after 2 years. And so that group is actually, they require certain information from clinics that want to participate. And so they get all this information from these different clinics, and then they're able to produce this data that we have. So I've seen other groups trying to mimic that, but that's happening more and more often in physical therapy. I believe they have that more in like the medical journals with orthopedic surgeons and things like that.
Yeah.
The MOON, I actually have the ACL rehab protocol for that MOON.
Oh, nice.
But that MOON group, but it's like Ohio State, Vanderbilt. There's Colorado University, Wash U. Is it the Cleveland Clinic? Amongst two other logos that I don't recognize, but I mean, there are a lot of hands on that MOON rehab protocol. And reading through that, they do a lot of their progression from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, not based on time, but based on where the athlete is at. So like one of the ones is like making sure that they can do more than 20 straight leg raises without an extension lag, stuff like that. That's what they use to track that. Mm-hmm. It's a really good protocol. If you guys get a chance to take a look at it, I really like it, because it kind of recognizes that people don't always rehab at the same rate.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that, those lines, like a phase, even if you're like programming just strength and conditioning, whatever it is, phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, those lines are very, very gray. Not everybody just goes step by step, ABC, very clean cut. It's very gray where, some people are going to go step by step. Some people are going to skip steps. Some people you're going to be at like step 1 for a long time before they're ready, all depending on kind of their baseline, their own confidence and expectations of, what happened, what's going on, what's our game plan. There's just a lot of factors that go into somebody's outcomes. I don't think I really had much more that was really different than anything we've already hit on, or anything that was in the Paterno article.
Yeah, it seems like I get to a highlighted section and I'm like, oh no, we talked about that already.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we talked about this already.
I did like in this one they had a few exercises. The tuck jumps.
Mm-hmm.
Jumping forward, jumping laterally onto a stable surface, unstable surface. Just things that you don't see in every article. Or maybe some good resources to check out if you're just looking to shake things up a little bit.
I did like this little paragraph here that they hit on. And it says, while an ACL revision may mitigate significant physical function deficits after graft failure, its effect on improving high-level function and mental health factors may be negligible. In summary, revision of an ACLR may be viewed as a salvage procedure, and robust and effective strategies to prevent the need for such surgical intervention must be employed. Basically saying the surgery is not going to prevent you from having another injury or get you back to where you were. You need a good PT, you need a good coach, athletic trainer to follow that up.
You need somebody to guide you through that process.
Absolutely.
Very good. Any closing statements? Anything you guys want to add?
Please don't, young therapists, please don't neglect the hips on this. It's a knee injury, but please don't neglect the hips.
I throw in my 2 cents. Don't forget about the foot and ankle. Goes upstream, downstream.
Is it Cook that always says, don't make a freshman mistake? Get that dorsiflexion to 15 degrees?
I don't know. Sounds like something. Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole connect chain issue. If the foot goes, the knee's going to go, hip's going to go. If the hip can't control it, knee's going to go, foot's going to go. It works both ways. So don't miss it. Don't let your patients be that one.
Well, probability is you're going to have a patient that has a re-tear.
When you put that on the
Here's something I want to talk about. How do you have that conversation with the patient? So you don't want to scare them because there's that whole psyche component with the injured leg.
What are we talking about?
So you have a patient come in, maybe it's their first day, and you're like, there's a 1 out of 4 chance that you're going to re-tear that thing. Do you tell them that? Do you wait? What have you done so far with your ACL patients?
They used to
Did you have something there?
No, they used talking to you.
I think you wait. Kind of feel them out a little bit. If they're less than compliant in an ideal situation, or they just seem like they're kind of in a rush, and that might be, someone who's like really gung-ho, like, I'm going to get back. I'm going to okay, 9 months. I'm going to do it in 8 months kind of person. That might be a situation where you tell them that, give them that, that eye-opening moment, I need to take this serious and make sure I am 100% good before going back. Because, some people, it's going to really freak them out, and they're going to be real timid about everything, and it's almost going to lead into itself.
Yep. I would agree with that. I think waiting to see the different types of personalities you have.
If you have a patient that's not you can tell, and usually you can tell who's doing their home exercise programs and who's not. You can kind of use it as a threat to, and I say threat loosely, but I mean, to get them motivated to get off the couch and actually do their exercise. Just look, you're gonna have to have it again, and then you're gonna have to have a knee replacement by the time you're 40 because you didn't take care of it now when you're 20. Like, you need to get on this.
That's good. Good conclusion.
So what about, I feel like we should probably nix this, but what about, so you have that patient that's like freaked out and you're thinking, I don't want to tell them. Then they mention that the doctor's already told them. How do you like bring them down from that?
Down.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like, this was the worst knee I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, one of those.
Yeah. Those
It was a 90-year-old knee.
knee.
What is a 90-year-old knee?
That's a 90-year-old knee. You're 25 years old. I don't know. I would guess you kind of run them through the tests. I'm going to compare it to like my low back pain patients. I ran you through the tests. Everything's looking good. You're showing every indication that you're going to do well with rehab. Those risks do exist, but you're doing everything in your power to keep that risk minimal. And I feel very confident with you getting back to your sport, getting back to your performance, using that leg like you had it before and getting it strong. We're going to be addressing it with X, Y, and Z. We're going to keep a monitor on you throughout the entire process.
Yeah. Walking through that game plan. And that goes probably not just that one day, but second day, third day, you know, always revisiting that.
Yeah.
You know, bringing them back to that ground level, as well as highlighting that it's a risk factor, not a causative factor. There's definitely a big difference there. So it doesn't guarantee that that's going to happen. And we're going to take every precaution. We're going to hit X, Y, Z, you know, really mitigate that risk and go from there.
Yeah.
You got to make your patient buy in. The patient has to be bought in on what you're giving them. And I think that plays one of the biggest parts in addition to just general education on it. This is what you guys are already kind of talking on.
Yeah. Communication.
So you bulletproof it. Yep. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed episode 3 of the Journal Club of Justice. I'm Dr. Adam Short of Run Mental. Got Dr. Dylan Collier here of the New Medical Nomads podcast, all about traveling PT and such. And then we had student physical therapist Brad Moore here to my right, soon to graduate. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If there's any specific topics or anything you guys really want us to hit on, want our thoughts and opinions on, or any suggestions, advice on how we can do this better to make it more feasible for you and more enjoyable, please contact us. Until next time, this is Journal Club of Justice. We're out.